The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Cliffside Manor in Malibu, California, where the Pacific Ocean's waves whispered against the rocky shore. The sprawling estate with its glass walls and manicured gardens buzzed with the chatter of elite guests gathered for a dinner party hosted by Ethan Caldwell, a 34-year-old tech billionaire whose software empire had reshaped the industry. The terrace, adorned with fairy lights and sleek marble tables, offered a breathtaking view of the coastline, but the air carried a subtle tension, like the calm before a storm. Ethan, dressed in a tailored navy suit, moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands with investors and flashing his charismatic smile. His fiancée, Lauren Pierce, a statuesque woman with sharp cheekbones and a designer gown that shimmered under the lights, clung to his arm, her laughter cutting through the hum of conversation. She was the picture of elegance, her auburn hair cascading in perfect waves, but her eyes held a glint of something colder, something that only those who knew her well could recognize. Among the staff bustling to keep the evening flawless was Maria Alvarez, a 42-year-old housekeeper whose quiet presence belied her strength. Maria, a single mother who had immigrated from Mexico 2 decades ago, moved with purpose, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun, her uniform crisp despite the long hours. She carried a tray of crystal flutes filled with champagne, her steps measured to avoid drawing attention. Her daughter Sophia was her world, a bright 16-year-old with dreams of college whose medical bills from a chronic illness kept Maria working tirelessly. Tonight, as she navigated the terrace, Maria's thoughts drifted to Sophia's latest hospital visit, her heart heavy, but her face composed. She had learned to wear dignity like armor, a lesson from her late father, a farm worker who had taught her to stand tall despite hardship. "Your worth isn't in what others think," Mija, he'd said, his voice rough but warm. "It's in what you carry inside." Those words anchored her as she served the guests, most of whom barely acknowledged her existence. Lauren, however, noticed her in a way that made the air feel sharp. As Maria approached a group of venture capitalists to offer drinks, Lauren's voice rang out sharp and deliberate. "Oh, look at her, scurrying around like a little mouse," she said loud enough for heads to turn. The guests paused, their smiles faltering. Lauren tilted her head, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "Maria, is it? Tell me, do they even teach you how to pour champagne properly where you're from, or is that too much to expect?" The words landed like a slap, and a hush fell over the terrace. Maria froze the tray, trembling slightly in her hands. Her cheeks flushed, but she kept her eyes lowered, refusing to give Lauren the satisfaction of a reaction. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others pretending to check their phones. Ethan, standing near a sleek outdoor bar, caught the tail end of Lauren's comment. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move, his mind racing. Lauren was his fiancée, the woman he'd chosen for her charm and ambition, but moments like this made him question what he was ignoring. Maria set the tray down on a nearby table, her movements deliberate. She straightened, meeting Lauren's gaze for a fleeting moment. "I do my best, Miss Pierce," she said softly, her accent subtle but unmistakable. "My father always said a job done with care is worth more than gold." The simplicity of her words carried a weight that silenced the murmurs. A few guests exchanged glances, impressed by her composure. Lauren, however, laughed a high artificial sound that grated against the ocean's rhythm. "How quaint," she said, tossing her hair. "Your father must have been a poet, then. Too bad poetry doesn't clean houses." The cruelty in her tone was unmistakable, and this time even the most distracted guests couldn't ignore it. A woman in a pearl necklace coughed awkwardly, while a man in a tuxedo muttered something about getting another drink. Maria's hands clenched briefly at her sides, but she pressed her lips together and turned to retrieve an empty tray, her dignity intact despite the sting. Ethan, still rooted near the bar, felt a knot form in his chest. He watched Maria walk away. Her shoulders squared, and something in her quiet strength stirred a memory of his own past. He hadn't always been the polished billionaire standing here now. Growing up in a small Ohio town, he'd watched his mother, a schoolteacher, work tirelessly to provide for him after his father left. She'd taught him that respect wasn't tied to wealth, a lesson he feared he'd forgotten in the whirlwind of success. Lauren's behavior wasn't new. She'd made snide remarks about staff before, always cloaked in humor. But tonight, in front of his investors and friends, it felt like a line crossed. He glanced at his best friend, Marcus Reed, a venture capitalist with a knack for cutting through pretense. Marcus, leaning against a railing with a glass of bourbon, raised an eyebrow at Ethan, his expression saying, "What words didn't? Are you going to let this slide?" Lauren, oblivious to Ethan's turmoil, sauntered over to him, her heels clicking on the marble. "Darling, don't you think the help could at least try to blend in?" she said, her voice dripping with mock innocence. "She's like a stain on this perfect evening." She reached for his hand, expecting his usual indulgent smile, but Ethan's face remained still, his blue eyes narrowing. "Lauren," he said quietly, his tone clipped. "That's enough." The words were soft, but carried an edge. And for a moment, Lauren's smile faltered. She recovered quickly, laughing it off. "Oh, Ethan, you're so serious. It's just a bit of fun." "She's used to it, aren't you, Maria?" She called out the last part, turning toward Maria, who was now clearing plates from a table nearby. Maria didn't respond, her face a mask of focus, but her hands trembled slightly as she stacked the dishes. The moment hung heavy, the ocean's waves, the only sound, breaking the silence. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but pointed. "You know, Lauren, some people might say it takes more class to serve others than to mock them." His words were a challenge, subtle but unmistakable, and a few guests nodded discreetly. Lauren's eyes flashed with irritation, but she masked it with a tight smile. "Oh, Marcus, always the philosopher," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Let's not ruin the evening with all this sensitivity." She turned back to Ethan, expecting him to back her up, but he was staring at Maria, who had paused to adjust a tablecloth, her movements precise despite the weight of the moment. Ethan's mind churned. He'd built his empire on fairness, on treating his team with respect, but had he been blind to Lauren's behavior because it suited his image? The thought gnawed at him, and he felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. As the party continued, the guests returned to their conversations, but the atmosphere had shifted. Maria moved to the edge of the terrace, where a small alcove offered a moment of reprieve. She leaned against the railing, the ocean breeze cooling her flushed cheeks. In her mind, she saw Sophia's face, her daughter's bright smile despite the hospital visits, the oxygen tank she sometimes needed. Maria had promised Sophia a better life, and enduring nights like this was part of that promise. But Lauren's words had cut deeper than usual, stirring memories of her childhood in a dusty border town where she'd been mocked for her worn shoes and second-hand clothes. She closed her eyes, whispering her father's words to herself, "Your worth is inside Mija." When she opened them, she caught Ethan watching her from across the terrace, his expression unreadable but intense. Their eyes met for a moment, and Maria quickly looked away, unsure what his gaze meant. Back at the bar, Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by Lauren's hand on his arm. "Come on, darling, let's mingle with the important people," she said, her voice syrupy. "We don't need to waste time on distractions." She glanced pointedly at Maria, who was now carrying a heavy tray of used glasses toward the kitchen. Ethan pulled his arm away, his voice low but firm. "Lauren, we need to talk, later." His tone left no room for argument, and Lauren's smile froze, sensing something had shifted. She nodded, her eyes narrowing, and excused herself to join a group of socialites, her laughter louder now, as if to drown out the unease. As Maria disappeared into the kitchen, Ethan overheard a snippet of conversation that made his blood run cold. Lauren, speaking to a friend in a hushed tone, said, "She's replaceable, you know. I've already got someone in mind, someone who knows their place." The words were meant to be private, but they reached Ethan's ears like a thunderclap. He glanced at Marcus, who had also overheard, his face grim. "You sure about her, man?" Marcus asked quietly, nodding toward Lauren. Ethan didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. The terrace, with its glittering lights and clinking glasses, felt like a stage where masks were slipping, and Ethan knew he couldn't ignore the truth much longer. Maria, carrying the weight of her duties and her dignity, was more than a housekeeper. She was a mirror reflecting everything he'd tried to forget about himself. And Lauren, with her polished cruelty, was a reminder of the life he'd built, but might no longer want. The night was far from over, and the spark of this moment was about to ignite something bigger. Rain lashed against the tall windows of Cliffside Manor's private library, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil brewing within its walls. It was a week after the disastrous dinner party, and the opulent Malibu estate felt heavier, its air thick with unspoken tensions. The library, with its mahogany shelves and leather-bound books, was Ethan Caldwell's sanctuary, a place where the tech billionaire escaped the demands of his empire. Tonight, though, the room was a battleground. Ethan stood by a roaring fireplace, its flickering light casting shadows across his angular face, his hands clasped behind his back. Across from him, Lauren Pierce sat poised on a velvet armchair, her emerald eyes glinting with defiance. She wore a silk blouse that clung to her frame, her posture calculated to exude control, but the faint tremor in her fingers betrayed her unease. The confrontation Ethan had promised on the terrace was unfolding, and the stakes felt higher than either had anticipated. "Lauren, what you did last week was unacceptable," Ethan said, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the patter of rain. "Maria didn't deserve that. Nobody does." His words carried the weight of a man wrestling with his own complicity. He'd spent the past week replaying the dinner, the way Maria's quiet dignity had exposed Lauren's cruelty, the way his own silence had let it happen. Lauren tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ethan?" "Darling, you're blowing this out of proportion," she said, her tone smooth as honey. "She's staff. I was just keeping her in line. You know how these people get if you don't remind them of their place." Her words dripped with casual disdain, and Ethan's jaw clenched. He turned to face her, his blue eyes narrowing. "Their place?" he repeated, his voice colder now. "Maria keeps this house running. She's not a prop for you to toy with." Lauren leaned forward, her smile tightening. "Oh, please, Ethan, don't play the saint. You've never cared about the help before. Why start now?" She stood crossing the room to a decanter of whiskey, pouring herself a glass with deliberate grace. "You're stressed about the merger, aren't you? That's what this is?" "You're taking it out on me." Her deflection was masterful, but Ethan wasn't swayed. He stepped closer, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "This isn't about the merger, Lauren. It's about you humiliating someone in front of my guests, our guests. It's about you thinking that's okay." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the storm's distant rumble. Meanwhile, in the Manor's dimly lit service corridor, Maria Alvarez moved silently, a stack of linens in her arms. The storm had forced the staff indoors, and she was tasked with preparing guest rooms for an upcoming board meeting. Her face was calm, but her mind churned with memories of the terrace, Lauren's mocking laughter, the guests' averted eyes, and Ethan's fleeting glance of something like regret. Maria had endured worse in her life: the taunts of classmates in her Texas border town, the loss of her husband to a construction accident, the endless hospital bills for Sophia's lung condition. But Lauren's words had cut deeper, stirring a fear that her job, her lifeline for Sophia's care, was at risk. As she entered the library to replace a set of towels, she froze, hearing voices. The door was ajar, and Lauren's sharp tone carried through. "She's incompetent, Ethan. I've seen her fumble simple tasks. We need someone better." Maria's heart sank, but she lingered, hidden in the shadows, clutching the linens like a shield. Inside, Ethan's patience was fraying. "Incompetent," he said, his voice rising. "Maria's been here longer than you've been in my life. She's never missed a day, never complained. You don't get to rewrite reality to justify your behavior." Lauren's eyes flashed, and she set her glass down with a sharp clink. "You're defending her over me. Your fiancé, Ethan. I'm the one who's been by your side at every gala, every deal. I'm the one who makes you look good." Her voice wavered, a crack in her polished facade, but she quickly recovered, stepping closer to him. "You're letting a maid come between us. Think about what that looks like." Ethan's hands balled into fists, his mind racing. He remembered his mother's words from his childhood in Ohio Power. "Doesn't make you better, Ethan. It shows who you really are." Lauren's cruelty was revealing more than he wanted to admit. Maria, still hidden, felt her pulse quicken. She shouldn't be here, shouldn't be listening, but Lauren's words echoed her fears. She shifted, and her elbow brushed against a shelf, dislodging an old leather-bound journal that fell with a soft thud. She knelt to pick it up, her fingers trembling as she opened it to return it to its place. Inside, tucked between the pages, was a folded letter, its edges yellowed. The letterhead bore the name of Ethan's company, and as Maria's eyes scanned it, her breath caught. It detailed a series of unauthorized transactions linked to Lauren's name funds siphoned from a charity initiative Ethan had championed. Maria's mind flashed to her past as a community organizer in Texas, where she'd uncovered similar schemes in local government. She knew the danger of holding such evidence, but the letter could protect her or destroy everything. She slipped it into her apron pocket, her heart pounding, and retreated silently, vowing to decide later what to do. Back in the library, Ethan paced his thoughts, a tangle of guilt and doubt. He'd met Lauren 3 years ago at a tech conference, dazzled by her charm and ambition. She'd fit seamlessly into his world of wealth and power, but now he wondered if he'd been blind to her true nature. "Lauren, I need you to understand something," he said, stopping to face her. "This isn't just about Maria. It's about who we are. If you can't respect the people who make this life possible, then what are we building?" Lauren's face hardened, and she stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. "Don't lecture me, Ethan. You're not perfect either. You think I don't see how you ignore the staff, how you let me handle them. You're just as complicit." Her words stung because they held a grain of truth. Ethan had been too busy building his empire to notice the small cruelties unfolding under his roof. The argument was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Javier, the manor's chef, his face flushed with agitation. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to speak with you," he said, glancing nervously at Lauren. Ethan nodded, grateful for the interruption. "What is it, Javier?" The chef hesitated, then blurted, "Miss Pierce told me to fire one of my assistants today. Said she wasn't up to standard. But she's been perfect. Lauren just didn't like her asking for a day off." Ethan's eyes darkened, and he turned to Lauren, who shrugged dismissively. "I'm just maintaining order, Ethan. You're too busy to deal with these things." Javier's fists clenched, and he added, "She also said we're all replaceable." "That's not right, sir." Ethan's gaze locked on Lauren, his voice icy. "Is that true?" Lauren rolled her eyes. "Don't make a drama out of it. I'm just being practical." Ethan excused Javier, promising to address it, and turned back to Lauren, his anger barely contained. "This stops now," he said. "You don't get to treat people like this in my home." Lauren's composure cracked and she snapped, "Your home. I'm going to be your wife, Ethan. This is our home, and I'll run it how I see fit." Her voice trembled with a mix of defiance and desperation, but Ethan's silence was more damning than any retort. He walked to the window, staring out at the storm, his mind replaying Maria's words from the terrace. "A job done with care is worth more than gold." He thought of his own journey from a kid with nothing to a man with everything, and wondered when he'd lost sight of what mattered. In her small room in the staff quarters, Maria sat on her bed, the letter burning a hole in her pocket. She thought of Sophia, asleep in their apartment across town, and the sacrifices she'd made to keep her daughter safe. The letter could expose Lauren, but it could also cost Maria her job, or worse. She remembered a night years ago standing before a city council in Texas exposing corruption, despite threats. She'd been fearless then, but now, with Sophia's health on the line, the stakes were higher. She tucked the letter into a locked box under her bed, her hands shaking. She'd decide tomorrow, she told herself, but the weight of the truth was already shifting her path. Back in the library, Ethan turned to Lauren, his voice steady but final. "We're not done talking about this," he said, "but I need time to think." Lauren's eyes widened, sensing a shift she couldn't control. "Ethan, don't do this," she said, her voice softening, almost pleading. "We're a team." But Ethan's gaze was distant, his thoughts on Maria, on Javier, on the people he'd overlooked. As the storm raged outside, the cracks in Lauren's perfect facade were spreading, and Ethan knew he couldn't ignore them much longer. The letter Maria held, though he didn't yet know, it was about to change everything. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly before the sleek, 80-foot yacht Stellar Horizon, its deck aglow with string lights and the hum of celebration. Anchored off the Malibu coast, the vessel hosted a milestone event for Ethan Caldwell's tech empire, a gala marking the launch of a groundbreaking AI platform. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and champagne as industry titans, investors, and media mingled under a starlit sky. Ethan, in a charcoal suit that accentuated his tall frame, stood at the yacht's bow, his hands gripping the railing as he forced a smile for a group of venture capitalists. His mind, however, was elsewhere, reeling from the week's tensions with Lauren Pierce, his fiancée, whose cruelty toward their housekeeper, Maria Alvarez, had begun to unravel his carefully curated world. Lauren, radiant in a silver gown that caught the light, like liquid mercury, worked the crowd with effortless charm, her laughter a calculated melody. But beneath her polished exterior, a storm was brewing, one that would soon erupt in a way no one could ignore. Maria moved through the yacht's lower deck, her uniform pristine, despite the chaos of the evening. She was tasked with overseeing the catering staff, a role she'd taken on with her usual quiet efficiency. Her dark eyes scanned the trays of hors d'oeuvres, ensuring every detail was perfect, but her thoughts were heavy. The letter she'd found in the library, a damning record of Lauren's financial misconduct, sat locked in her room, a secret that could upend everything. Maria's life had taught her to tread carefully. As a single mother, she'd faced enough battles to know the cost of speaking out. Yet the memory of Lauren's mockery on the terrace, coupled with the overheard threat to replace her, gnawed at her resolve. She thought of her daughter Sophia, whose latest hospital visit had left Maria more determined to secure their future. Tonight, she would keep her head down, but fate had other plans. As Maria ascended to the main deck with a tray of crystal flutes, Lauren's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. "Oh, Maria, there you are," she called, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Heads turned and the chatter quieted. Lauren stood near a group of investors, a glass of wine in hand, her smile sharp. "I was just telling everyone how challenging it must be for you to keep up with an event like this. I mean, with your background." The word hung in the air laced with condescension, and a few guests shifted uncomfortably. Maria's grip tightened on the tray, but she kept her expression neutral, her voice steady. "I manage Miss Pierce. My job is to make sure everything runs smoothly." Lauren's laugh was high and brittle, drawing more eyes. "Smoothly? Darling, you nearly dropped a tray earlier. Let's hope you don't ruin Ethan's big night." The lie was blatant. Maria had done no such thing, but Lauren's words painted a picture of incompetence, and the crowd's murmurs grew. Ethan, overhearing from across the deck, felt his stomach twist. He'd promised himself he'd address Lauren's behavior, but the past week's arguments had only deepened the rift between them. Her accusation now in front of his investors was a deliberate escalation. He moved toward her, his face a mask of control, but his eyes burned with frustration. Maria, sensing the tension, set the tray down and began to retreat. But Lauren wasn't done. "Honestly, Ethan, we need to talk about the staff," she said loudly, ensuring everyone heard. "This one's been a disaster tonight. The catering's a mess. Wrong appetizers, late service. I had to step in myself." The guests exchanged glances, some nodding sympathetically, others looking skeptical. Maria froze, her heart pounding. She knew the catering had been flawless. She'd checked every detail herself. This was sabotage. The accusation hung heavy, and Maria's resolve cracked. She turned to face Lauren, her voice low but clear, carrying over the deck. "Miss Pierce, I've worked hard to make tonight perfect. The appetizers were exactly as ordered, and the service has been on time. If there's a problem, it's not with the staff." Her words were calm, but laced with a quiet fire, and the crowd stilled. A woman in a sequined dress gasped softly, while a man in a tuxedo raised an eyebrow, impressed. Lauren's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. "You're contradicting me," she snapped, stepping closer. "You're here to serve, not to talk back. Know your place." The venom in her tone was unmistakable, and the air grew thick with second-hand embarrassment. Guests looked down at their drinks, avoiding the scene, but one figure didn't, a journalist named Clara Nguyen, whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Clara, known for her investigative exposés, had been watching Lauren all evening, sensing a story. Ethan reached the group, his presence commanding silence. His voice was low, but carried a dangerous edge. "Lauren, stop." The words were simple, but their weight stopped her cold. She turned to him, her smile forced. "Ethan, darling, I'm just being honest. She's out of her depth." But Ethan's gaze shifted to Maria, who stood tall despite the humiliation, her hands clasped tightly. He saw not just a housekeeper, but a woman who'd endured more than most, whose strength mirrored his mother's in ways that stirred his conscience. "Maria," he said, his voice steady, "is everything in order?" With the catering, Maria met his eyes, her voice unwavering. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. I checked every order myself. The kitchen logs can confirm it." Her calm certainty was a rebuke to Lauren's lies, and a murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Lauren's face flushed, her composure slipping. "Logs? You think anyone cares about your little notes?" She spat, her voice rising. "This is Ethan's night, and you're making it about you." The accusation was desperate, and Ethan had heard enough. He stepped between them, his voice booming across the deck. "Enough, Lauren. You're lying, and everyone here knows it." The crowd gasped, and Clara Nguyen's pen moved furiously over her notebook. Ethan turned to the guests, his tone resolute. Maria has kept this event running perfectly, and I won't let anyone disrespect her or the staff who make nights like this possible. Lauren, you owe her an apology. The demand hung in the air, and the yacht seemed to hold its breath. Lauren's eyes widened, her lips parting, but no words came. For the first time, she looked small, her confidence shattered under Ethan's gaze. Maria, caught off guard by Ethan's defense, felt tears prick her eyes, but held them back. She didn't want pity. She wanted respect. In a moment of courage, she spoke, her voice soft but piercing. Mr. Caldwell, thank you, but I don't need an apology. I just want to do my job. For my daughter Sophia, I've learned to carry heavy things, trash insults, whatever it takes. She's sick, but she's strong, and I work so she can have a future. That's what matters to me. Her words were raw, unguarded, and they landed like a thunderclap. A woman in the crowd wiped her eyes, and a man nodded solemnly, whispering, "That's real." Clara Nguyen scribbled faster, her instincts telling her Maria's story was only the beginning. Lauren, cornered, tried to laugh it off. "Oh, please spare us the sob story," she said, but her voice trembled and the crowd's silence was deafening. Ethan's anger boiled over, but he kept his voice steady, addressing the guests. "Maria's not just staff. She's the heart of this operation, and I've been too blind to see it. I'm sorry, Maria, for letting this happen." His apology was met with murmurs of respect, and Maria nodded, her throat tight. Lauren, desperate to regain control, grabbed Ethan's arm. "Ethan, you're embarrassing me. Let's talk privately." But he pulled away, his eyes cold. "No, Lauren, this is public. You made it that way." He turned to Maria, his voice softer. "Take the rest of the night off. You've done more than enough." Maria hesitated, then nodded, retreating below deck, her heart a mix of relief and fear. As Maria descended, Clara Nguyen approached Ethan, her voice low. "Mr. Caldwell, I've been looking into your fiancé's dealings. There's talk of financial irregularities tied to your charity fund. Care to comment?" Ethan's blood ran cold. He thought of the library argument, Lauren's dismissals, and a sinking feeling took hold. "Not now," he said, but his mind raced to the letter. Maria had found a letter he'd yet to see, but would soon change everything. Clara nodded, her eyes sharp. "I'll be in touch." She slipped away, leaving Ethan staring at Lauren, who was now laughing too loudly with a group of investors, her facade cracking further. Below deck, Maria sat in a quiet corner, her hands trembling. She thought of the letter of Sophia, of the risk she was carrying. She'd wanted to stay invisible, but Lauren's cruelty had pushed her into the light. Ethan's defense had been unexpected, but it didn't erase the danger. As the yacht rocked gently, Maria made a decision. She'd confront Ethan with the letter, but not tonight. The truth was too heavy, and she needed time to prepare. Above, Ethan watched Lauren's performance, his heart hardening. The journalist's words echoed, and he knew the truth was closing in. The yacht, with its glittering lights and false harmony, was a powder keg, and the breaking point had just been reached. The cliffside venue in Malibu shimmered under a canopy of stars, its glass walls reflecting the golden glow of chandeliers and the distant twinkle of the Pacific Ocean. The Grand Charity Gala, hosted by Ethan Caldwell to launch his foundation for underprivileged youth, was the talk of the elite, drawing philanthropists, tech moguls, and media to the opulent setting. The air buzzed with anticipation, the clink of glasses mingling with soft jazz from a live band. Ethan stood at the center of it all, his tailored black tuxedo impeccable, but his eyes carried a weight that hadn't been there weeks ago. The yacht incident where he'd publicly defended Maria Alvarez against his fiancée, Lauren Pierce's cruelty, had shifted something fundamental in him. Tonight, as he prepared to announce a $50 million initiative, he felt the walls of his carefully curated life closing in. Lauren, resplendent in a crimson gown, moved through the crowd with practiced grace, but her smile was brittle, her confidence shaken by the cracks Ethan's defiance had exposed. Maria, for the first time, was not working, but attending as a guest, her simple navy dress a stark contrast to the extravagance around her. The night promised revelations, and the truth was about to burn through the facade. Ethan scanned the room, his thoughts a tangle of guilt and resolve. The letter Maria had found in the library, evidence of Lauren's financial misconduct, now sat in his suit pocket, its contents confirmed by his legal team. It detailed how Lauren had siphoned funds from his charity account, funneling them into offshore accounts tied to her name. The betrayal cut deeper than her cruelty to Maria. It was a violation of everything Ethan had built. He thought of his late mentor, Dr. James Harrow, a professor who'd seen potential in a scrappy kid from Ohio, and taught him that wealth meant nothing without purpose. Harrow's lessons had driven Ethan to start this foundation, and now Lauren's greed threatened to taint it. As he adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes found Maria across the room, standing quietly near a floral display. She looked out of place, but composed her presence, a reminder of the dignity he'd failed to protect until recently. Maria, clutching a glass of sparkling water, felt the weight of the evening. Ethan had invited her as a guest, a gesture that both honored and unnerved her. She'd spent the past weeks wrestling with the decision to give him the letter, finally slipping it to him after the yacht incident, her hands trembling as she did. She hadn't expected his quiet gratitude or the way his eyes softened when he promised to handle it. Now, standing among the elite, she felt exposed, her simple dress a beacon of her difference. But she was here for Sophia, her daughter, whose latest treatment had shown promise. Maria's thoughts drifted to a memory of her own past, a rally in Texas, where she'd stood before a crowd exposing corruption despite threats. That fire still burned in her, and tonight, she sensed, would test it again. Lauren, unaware of the letter's discovery, worked the crowd with calculated charm, her laughter masking her unease. She'd sensed Ethan pulling away his silences, growing colder since the yacht. Her attempts to smooth things over private dinners, whispered promises, had met a wall of resolve she couldn't breach. As she chatted with a tech CEO, her eyes darted to Ethan, who was now speaking with Clara Nguyen, the journalist whose probing questions on the yacht had set her nerves on edge. Clara, in a sleek black dress, held a tablet, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She'd spent weeks digging into Lauren's past, uncovering a trail of questionable deals that stretched beyond Ethan's company. Tonight, she was ready to confront the truth, and her presence made Lauren's skin prickle. The gala's program began, and Ethan took the stage, his voice steady as he outlined the Foundation's mission to fund education and health care for underserved communities. The crowd applauded, but his words carried a personal weight. "This work isn't about money," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "It's about people who show us what integrity looks like, even when the world tries to break them." His eyes found Maria, and a murmur rippled through the crowd as guests noticed her. Lauren's smile froze, her hands clenching her clutch. She leaned toward a friend, whispering, "What is she doing here?" But before she could say more, Clara Nguyen stepped forward, raising her hand to ask a question. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice clear, "can you comment on allegations of financial misconduct within your charity fund? Sources suggest unauthorized transactions linked to someone close to you." The room stilled, and Lauren's face paled. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "I'm aware of the allegations," he said, his voice calm but firm. and I assure you they're being addressed. Transparency is the foundation of this initiative, and we'll ensure justice is served." The crowd murmured, sensing a scandal, and Clara pressed further. "Can you confirm the involvement of Lauren Pierce?" Gasps echoed, and Lauren's laugh was sharp, desperate. "This is absurd," she said, stepping toward the stage. "Ethan, tell her she's mistaken." But Ethan's silence was deafening. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the letter, its creased edges visible to all. "Lauren," he said, his voice low but carrying across the room, "this ends tonight." The crowd parted as Ethan stepped down, holding the letter aloft. "This document," he said, "details transactions you authorized, without my knowledge, diverting funds meant for kids like the ones we're here to help." Lauren's eyes widened, her voice rising in panic. "That's a lie. I would never—" But Ethan cut her off, his voice like steel. "I had it verified. It's over, Lauren." The room erupted in whispers, and Clara's tablet glowed as she recorded every word. Lauren, cornered, tried to salvage her image, her voice trembling with false sincerity. "Ethan, I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding. I was only trying to help the foundation grow. Let's talk privately." She reached for his arm, but he stepped back, his face a mask of disgust. "You don't get to apologize your way out of this," he said. "You betrayed me, this foundation, and every person here who believed in it." Maria, watching from the sidelines, felt her heart pound. She hadn't expected Ethan to confront Lauren so publicly, and the weight of her role in this moment pressed on her. She thought of Sophia, of the hospital bills, of the years she'd endured, insults to keep her daughter safe. Now her courage in sharing the letter had sparked a reckoning. A guest beside her, an older woman in pearls, touched her arm gently. "You're the housekeeper, aren't you?" she asked. Maria nodded, bracing for judgment, but the woman smiled. "You've got more strength than most people here." Maria's throat tightened and she managed a quiet, "Thank you." Lauren, her facade crumbling, turned to the crowd, her voice shrill. "You're all going to believe a maid over me. I'm the one who belongs here, not her." The outburst was met with stunned silence, and Ethan's voice cut through, final and unyielding. "You're wrong, Lauren. Maria belongs here more than you ever will. And we're done." The words landed like a thunderclap, and Lauren's face contorted, a mix of rage and desperation. She opened her mouth to speak, but a choked sob escaped instead. With a final glance at Ethan, she fled the stage, her heels echoing as she pushed through the crowd, leaving a trail of stunned silence. Ethan turned to Maria, his expression softening. "Maria, I owe you more than an apology," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "You showed me what I was too blind to see. This foundation needs people like you, people with heart." He paused, then added, "I'd like you to lead our community outreach program, if you'll accept." The crowd gasped, then erupted in applause, the sound swelling with admiration. Maria's eyes widened, tears brimming but held back. "Mr. Caldwell, I don't know what to say," she managed. "For Sophia, I'll try." Ethan smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "That's all I ask." As the applause continued, Clara approached Maria, her voice low. "I looked into your past, Ms. Alvarez. Did you know you worked with Dr. James Harrow in Texas years ago on a community project?" Maria froze, memories flooding back. Harrow, the kind professor who'd mentored her during her organizing days. "I didn't know he was connected to Mr. Caldwell," she whispered. Clara nodded. "He was Ethan's mentor, too. Seems like fate brought you together." The revelation hit Maria like a wave, tying her to Ethan in a way she hadn't imagined. The gala ended with Ethan's announcement of the foundation's first grant, dedicated to Sophia's hospital in Maria's honor. The crowd cheered, and Maria, overwhelmed, stepped outside to the cliff's edge, the ocean breeze cooling her tears. Ethan joined her, his voice quiet. "I'm starting over, Maria. I want to build something real, like Harrow did. Will you help me?" Maria nodded, her heart full. "For Sophia," she said, "and for everyone who's been overlooked." The stars above burned bright, and the weight of the night lifted, replaced by a fragile hope. Lauren's downfall was complete, but for Ethan and Maria, a new chapter was just beginning.